Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 252, an important look at historical fantasy fiction.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge,
break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And historically yours, I am Michael Miller.
At 2, Michael.
At 2, Jeffrey.
It's because we stab each other all the time, so we kind of
whenever possible.
It's like a little fun game here at the World Builders Anvil.
Yeah, I mean, look, stitches and bleeding are all part of friendship. I read that somewhere.
Due to the coexisting restraining orders, that's why we record remotely now.
It's true. It makes it very difficult to follow the law. Especially since Jeff is today trying to get me to come over the house to hit the record button, even though he lives an hour away.
It depends on traffic.
I know.
It's the loveliness of Hartford.
So, again, this one kind of comes from the forums. We're talking about historical fantasy fiction today.
Yep.
And Jeff has so lovingly created a wonderful show note list for us. But this was, do you remember who inspired this one?
I don't know if they actually asked for this one. I think it was George who asked. He wanted tidbits on different types of fantasy fiction, and he might have said this one. I know he said grimdark, so we'll definitely be doing one on that. I believe it was George. I could have.
I think you're right, and this is actually a moment where I want to remind. There's a number of people who are requesting to join, and we've said this tons of times, and I feel like it doesn't need to be repeated, but there's at least 3 people who I really want to approve them for acceptance into the group, but they still haven't answered our prerequisite questions. And the prerequisite questions are simply to weed out bots and spammers. Yep. So, guys, it's nothing personal. You can honestly answer those questions in almost any way you'd like. As long as it seems like there's a person behind the words, we're going to accept you. Like, we're not, super exclusionary that way.
No, we're actually kind of the opposite. We're pretty exclusionary. It hasn't really had any real problems in the group. We've had a couple people, but in general, it's not been too bad for spammers.
Yeah, but there's at least 2 people. There's one person specifically who has,
I rejected them all today.
You did? Okay. I feel bad now because there's one person who...
What I do is I don't think they can get back to the questions. So now my new strategy is I've come up with a little thing. I message them and then I decline them. I'm like, if you go back...
you have to re-up sort of...
Because one of the things I've heard is it's sometimes slow for the questions to pop up. So like if they do it and then they hop back to go check something else on Facebook, which is really easy to do,
they lose the opportunity
at all. So I that's just the way some of the people I know I've done that to have actually joined anyway. So the thing is, if we reject you, it's either by accident because we hit the wrong button, which Michael only does. I never do that. And actually, I don't think that's ever happened that I know of.
I was about to say, Jeff, you are the wrong button.
and he hits me all the time. And
I try. But so, yeah, there was at least one person who tried to join and didn't do the questions, and then I shot them a reminder message, and they were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, yeah, I'd be more than happy to answer the questions." And that's totally cool. And then I saw them sitting there in the non-answered question.
Yeah, I think what happens though, I think when you go back, I don't know if you can get to them again. So I think it's a Facebook quirk. So the thing is, when you do that, we just have to delete them now. So we should probably talk about this off the show, though. So.
No. This is good though. So the listeners, anyone who wants to join the Undercroft, the closed Facebook group, as long as you know this information, you'll know. Like if you didn't get prompted with questions and then you were denied, try again. It's not your fault. We'd love to have you. Please join. But when you do, just sit there for at least a minute so that the questions pop up.
And if you actually make fun of Michael and I in different questions, even if it doesn't make sense, if the jokes are good.
Oh yeah. No, we love that stuff. There's we have a lot of clever people that.
Well, I used to like it better when we could actually get to the answers after they did it. So if someone else, you could still go in and look at them, but now you can't see them after they've answered them.
I don't know what that's all about, because previously it was like a log, and you could you'd be like, oh, this person wrote something very clever, go read them. And now I can't do that. Like, whoever is the first person to approve is like the only person who gets to look at it.
And sometimes even if you think it's witty, it's like gone in a second. So it's a short attention span. So, okay. So now on to historical fiction. Let's turn back the dial and go back in time. And
gonna go back in time. Sorry.
Please don't break any copyright laws here.
That's my required Huey Lewis in the News reference, as well as Back to the Future boiled into the same.
Well, I think as long as you performed it, we can't get in trouble. So,
well, I wrote it. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm still in litigation with Huey Lewis.
But you think any day now is going to come down on your side?
Any moment now. I mean, I literally have no proof, but I have a very diligent lawyer.
I have a very strongly worded letter.
My opinion is that I should get all the royalties for this. Why is that, sir? Did you write it? My opinion is that I should get all of the royalties for this.
For the movie.
one of these days it's going to work. I'm just saying.
Yep. Well, good luck with that. Okay. So getting a little bit into the topic here. What is historical fiction? And historical fiction is kind of neat. I like it. I dig it. You know, it's set typically in a historical Earth setting. Not too shocking. It's kind
of right?
You know, it's kind of limited to existing myths or logical extensions therefrom. You know, and you kind of see it, different writers and storytellers do it differently. Some will take strictly sort of like existing mythos and use that. And it might be tweaked a little bit to their vision as they do it, but other people will kind of come up with things that might have been as well on top of that. So, the other thing is typically in most historical fiction I've read, and this probably is not completely true, historical fantasy fiction, it's usually linked back to some event that happened. And that's probably not really true. Like, I know there's like some caveman stuff out there, which isn't like fantasy fiction, but I don't think it's really back to an event that we know of. So sometimes you're just kind of like taking a look into a culture, but usually there's some kind of historical event, you know, that things are connected to. Now, there's some really
based on the name. Which makes sense based on the name.
Yeah, based off the name. Now, there's some really tightly related genres. Arthurian fantasy, obviously, is based off of historical Earth. You know, people might argue that there's no historical facts behind it, but there's stuff actually tied in history to possibly even a character existing who might have had an A in his name, who might have been
might have had an A in his name,
who might have been there fighting against the Saxons when they invaded. But that aside, though, it doesn't matter. I think some historical fantasy fiction is really tied closely to history. Other is sort of alternate history, or others are just they're telling the story on Earth. Right? That's ultimately the big key. And now I don't know this. I've not read any, but I kind of threw it in here. Christian fiction, I would assume, is all Earth-based fantasy fiction. For Christian fantasy, because the religious side of it is at least Earth based, but I could be wrong. I guess you could have an alternate planet where they're worshiping God. I guess I don't know enough about that genre to really do it justice here, but I assume it's tightly coupled to Earth. And cultural fiction. You know, and Arthurian, you could argue is cultural fiction, but you could argue that Arthur is also Christian. Oh, most definitely. But I think when they say Christian fantasy, it is like for Christian adult fantasy. Yeah.
I follow you.
Stuff you find in like a Christian bookstore. The cultural fiction. I see a lot of Celtic stuff out there, but you're seeing a lot more stuff that's derived off of ancient cultures from all over the world, you know, because they're interesting and they have neat stories to tell. Your knuckles. Wow. Okay. But it can be any cultural group from anywhere in the world. That's often historical earth-setting fiction. Because it's so tightly coupled to one culture group, where it's about them, it kind of starts to get identified to that cultural. Because there's a market for that. Would
you say that mythology is cultural historical fiction?
Not necessarily. Well, it's all mythology is fantasy fiction, I guess you would say, for a culture. Mm-hmm. But it's not necessarily kind of, but not really, because the purpose, the cultural for the purposes is looking back at a culture that no longer exists. So it's talking about druids at Stonehenge from today's spectrum. Perspective. So that was sort of people coming up with stories, teach them right and wrong based off of their beliefs. So
okay. So, but you could argue that anything that somebody writes now that deals with that, like i.e., the God of War series.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is a historical fiction.
I think it would depend on how they go about it, and I'm not familiar with the God of War stuff. I know.
Really? You would love it. You would love the God of War. It's right up. It is right up your alley. I don't know that you
story-wise I might like it, but
story-wise, I don't know that the gameplay is up your alley, but the story is definitely up your alley. You would love it.
They're coming out with a new game called Ancient Cities, where you can play a Neolithic group, and it's a city builder for Neolithic groups.
Oh, that's up my alley. That's definitely up your alley. All they need to do is is some sort of life sim with Kratos, and you'd be down.
I'd be down with that probably. And I know the characters there are probably based off of, I would assume, Greek or Roman mythology.
Yeah, Kratos was a Spartan.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that character in history. So
I don't think he is a character from history. Okay. I think he's just a character from the game,
in the story.
But the long and the short of it is that Kratos basically goes through Greek mythology and kills everyone that you know of. He kills so many gods and titans. It's insane, but it is so good. Not only from just
I've heard really good stuff about the story. Yep.
Yeah, not just from like a video game perspective, but like the story, like the writing, the characters. I'm a huge fan of that series, even though I have not completed all of the games.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think you and I have a different definition of completed on games too. So
what do you mean?
Mine's just finishing the story one time, and that's all I really count. I don't look at percentage completed or anything.
Oh no, I'm okay with that too. That's what I'm referring to, because I don't think I've completed the stories on both God of War 1 and 2 and possibly 3, but that's where I stopped.
So maybe 3 wasn't quite so good then.
I'm not sure. Well, no, it was good. I don't know that I ever finished it. I definitely own it, but I don't know that I completed that one, and I don't have any of the PSP ones or number 4. So I'm not in that camp, unfortunately. But the ones that I have gone through, they brought me great joy, and the character I think is fantastic. I could go on and on. That gets us into video games, but we're talking about historical fiction. No, okay. Exactly.
So now some of the pros, some of the, I think, strengths of historical fiction, and you're going to see some overlap in the cons with some of the same things. So history is filled with the greatest stories. The stuff you really can't believe really happened in history. And I think it's a real shame that most people hate history classes, which to me just says how bad your history teachers are. If you hate history, it's you had bad history professors or teachers. History has the most interesting stories, and we see some of them time and time again that get retold. The whole Julius Caesar thing has been told 7,000 times, but it's a great story. But, there are a lot of stories that don't get told a lot, too. So the thing is, there are lots of events and stories that you can kind of latch on to. And really, a lot of times, those could become plots for non-Earth-based fiction as well, too. But the problem is that people are going to be like, oh, this story's a little too crazy. It's a little unbelievable. And you're like, oh.
And they're like, no, you don't understand. I actually toned this down from a real thing.
Yeah, because it was really crazy and real.
Yeah. I mean, look at the 300. It's a perfect example. Now, granted, what most people know of as the story of the 300, which is the Battle of Thermopylae.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are like, oh, it was just the 300 versus millions of men. That's not true. There were 300 Spartans. That is true. But each Spartan also had like 2 attendants. There was also like somewhere is like 8,000, I think, Thebians, and like there was tons of other men there fighting, but there were only 300 Spartans, and they did,
and they held the center of the line,
and they did hold the center of the line, and at one point said to everybody else, beat feet, and we've got this. And so that is true, but it wasn't just them for days on end. There was
the movie was not accurate historical fiction, but
no,
I'm not a big believer that it needs to be.
No, absolutely not. But see, that's a classic example where you have a real story that is a great story that they fudge it up a little bit for the sake of Hollywood or a movie or even books.
Yep.
Like there's
those start off as comics. Yep.
Well, I'm referring to a book that I read that's called The Hot Gates, and it is a historical fiction. Although, as far as I'm aware, the author did a ton of research, and a lot of what he put in the book is as close to faithful to the cultures involved, both the Greeks and the Persians.
Yep.
So if you get a chance to pick up the book The Hot Gates, it is a fantastic and honestly riveting read. It's a really great look at Greek culture.
Very good. Now, for the next strength here, Earth has a wide variety of cultural myths you could build off of. I mean, if you don't want to do like, Greek and Roman stuff has been done to death, or, even European stuff has been done to death, which some of it has and some of it hasn't. But, if you want to find something that's not, been done to death, there are so many things that still exist out there that have ever barely been touched on.
I think one of the reasons that you see that commonality, though, is probably the exposure and the relatability.
Of course,
we've all seen, we've all seen tons of movies that included, how many, just like you said, how many times have the Greeks and the Romans been done to death in fiction? So we're familiar with it. Like we've played God of War. We've played video games. We've seen the 300. We've watched, Spartacus, like there's tons of it. So it's approachable.
And when someone's spending millions of dollars to produce something, I think it's easier for them if it's been done before. It's like there's a track record of success.
That's very, very true. These days, you see more sequels than original intellectual properties just because the metrics are better.
Now, the next interest I have written down here, which I'd like, is if you want to draw more people into fantasy, historical fiction is a way to do it. And I think even in stuff that wouldn't call itself historical fantasy fiction now, they dabble at the edges of magic in there now. And I'll actually mention one of them later, which I think is a great example. But the thing is, you can actually reach a larger audience than fantasy. And if the fantasy elements are a bit more mild, they might join you for a ride. I think that there's a chance of that. That's no evidence there. It's just my opinion.
I think it's a fair opinion.
Yeah. So do I. That's why I mentioned it. Now,
I'm going to mention a really unfair opinion right now.
This is stupid, but I'm going to tell you anyway.
And I want you to believe it and take it as true.
Now, the other thing is, it's a reason to research history and mythology. I think that's a pro. That's just me. I think you should do that regardless if you do Earth-based. This stuff's interesting. The things that have happened in history are sometimes unbelievable. If more people knew it, more fantasy plots wouldn't be called outrageous. And the other problem is a lot of people, especially if you're coming up from the side of gaming, where you play like a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, I can't think of any historical Earth based culture, if you're trying to be realistic, that had anything similar to like a D&D style spell system for magic. Now, there were some people who had spells, but they were more tied to rituals, not as quick and sort of action-packed as you would get like in a D&D spell. So no magic missile for the Egyptians.
Oh, the poor Egyptians.
Or maybe we just haven't found it yet. So, make it work in, make the story believable. I'll buy it. I'm a sucker for stuff. Okay. Now, cons. Here where I see other problems with it.
With historical fiction in general? Or?
With historical fiction, but we're talking about fantasy fiction specifically. So,
okay. Well, yeah, you know what I mean. I said one thing. I meant all of it.
Yeah, and your world building that you're adding to it, the elements you're adding to make it fantastic must conform with the culture you're playing with, right? Or you must have some believable way to say this is why it was wrong.
This is why what we know as real is wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Like what is that? One of your favorite fictions there, Stargate.
Yes, exactly. And they did a very good job with that. Yes.
Right. Well, that's why I'm citing it.
Yeah. The risk of reading like a history textbook. If you're the kind of person who likes to share your world building, I think one of the risks you fall into is making it boring, making it about names and places of things that existed and not so much about a good story.
Good point.
And I think it's probably because of the research you've had to do. And the research is another problem, right? History is a political tool. Let's be honest. So you have to be very careful with your resources because they might not be accurate for two reasons. One, people today might be trying to rewrite history to portray it in a way that advances their political agenda today. That's how it happened throughout history. And a lot of times, especially when you go further back, a lot of the cultures and people we know, we don't have written versions of their accounts. So like if you're the Celts or the Germans, who lived in Europe, we know it from the Roman perspective because they wrote it down.
That's what I was going to say. Well, the winners have the records.
And some of those cultures didn't have writing, or at least they didn't use it for that purpose. Even cultures that had written words sometimes didn't write down histories.
And that's why they deserve to lose.
That's right. The Persians, used writing to manage their empire, but they didn't have historians. So
really?
No. So, you find some tablets saying who the kings are and what they did. The thing is Herodotus, the supposed the great liar of history and the first historian of history, puts words into the mouths of like kings and stuff at events he never saw.
I did not know Herodotus was an unreliable source.
Well, he is, but he was writing from the perspective of Greece. So he's like, this in his mind was what made sense that the Persian king said before they crossed over into Greece. But he really had no evidence because history back then was more of a way of telling your side of what happened, and a lot of it's to build up your side. So in most ancient history too, like the numbers of people who were involved in battles are always exaggerated by both the winners and losers. If they both write it down, if you ask the losers, oh no, they had 10 times that number.
Oh, we were dramatically outnumbered. Our men fought so bravely.
And then you read the winners and like, well, we were dramatically outnumbered, but we
had like
prevailed.
14 guys. Yeah, our guys are just so well trained.
That's right. Our guys are just so good at this. There's a great battle that took place between the Hittites and the Egyptians in the Levant and near Armageddon town. And
not a selling place. Not a selling place as a tourism name.
Well, there's actually a town where the word Armageddon derives from.
I kind of figured, but it just cracks me up. Welcome to Armageddon. It's right near murder.
There's been a major battle in most Mideastern wars historically, like back in those days, fought in the plain of this town too. So this town has bad luck. And in the Christian Armageddon, there's supposed to be the final battle in the plain of the city too.
Well, again, look at the name,
Yeah. Who knew?
Chicken or the egg, you know what I'm saying?
Maybe we should have named it that. But the funny thing is, it's like in that battle, like the Egyptians, wrote about their massive victory, but the archaeological evidence doesn't show any massive victory. They gained no territory. And I think most historians today think it was a stalemate. But that's not what was written down.
Mm-hmm. It was a decided victory.
Mm-hmm. They've the Pharaoh just went out by himself and killed the entire army 3 times. It was impressive.
Very thorough.
Yeah.
We should probably get back. I feel like we're way off topic.
No, we're not.
No? Okay. All right.
No, because we're talking about how history is not always a reliable source for what was real. So, and changing evidence for what we know, if you do a really good job and research it really well, they might unearth some new evidence that proves the other theory is wrong. So, and this is one of the things where I always tell people, pick something that sounds good and believable and just go with it. You can't be perfect. You don't have perfect knowledge, and you're writing fiction after all.
Yeah, there is that part.
Traditional magic really makes sense. A lot of times, world builders like to systematize things, but when you get into the nitty gritty and start going, you're like, why do they even do this? This makes no sense if you look at this. We have lists of ancient like rituals and spells people would do. And a lot of times it's not quite so cohesive as we like to think when we develop magic systems. So I think there's a strength to that, right? Because in a way, I think we're getting a little too focused on hard magic anymore.
Yeah, too system reliant. Which if you're making. I mean, look, I don't want to bash either one because I think there's validity for both. Yeah, there's validity for both. There's an advantage and disadvantage to both. I think that when you're creating a hard fantasy fiction, and you create a magic system, that it lends continuity and consistency to the entirety of that aspect of the story. So if all the magic makes sense, then hey, look, throughout the book there's a consistency and all the magic makes sense. But that's not exactly how the real world worked, and not necessarily how you have to do it. I don't think there's anything wrong with just saying, okay, well, this worked this time and it didn't another time, and not ever explaining it or explaining it. I mean, I don't see a problem with either one of those.
No, neither do I. But when you're doing historical, if you try to base it, especially off of a culture's magic, and you start looking at what we know about it, it's definitely not going to make sense. And part of it's maybe because we have holes in our knowledge. The other part of it is, we do.
I'm sorry. There's something.
Now here's the last one, and this will make sense for why Michael's laughing at me, right? You have a high chance of criticism if you get involved in this kind of stuff today, I think. And there's two things I see critically put out all of the time. First, there's too much Western European history stuff out there, and so you'll get criticized if you do that. But then if you don't, you risk being accused of doing cultural appropriation. I wouldn't worry about it. Just do what you want to do, and realize that you might get criticized for it. So just do the best you can and make a great story, and that's that.
Yeah, I think that's such a consistency with the show's theme, is that we always come back to just write a good story. I can forgive a lot, and I think most readers are willing to let it go if you entertain, if you create a good story. Because there's certainly books that I've read that are very well researched and that all their information makes sense, but it's not an enjoyable read. So what's the point? What's the point?
What's the point? And ultimately, there's 7 billion plus people in the world at this point. You're going to get criticized by someone if you actually are successful at sharing your story. Now, I want to go into a few interesting works. One I've never seen, but I heard so much about, and Michael has maybe seen it, so I just threw it in there.
What's that?
Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Oh, fun movie.
It looks
I never read the books. I'm not or book. I don't know if there's more than one. But the movie was fun, and I don't know how accurately the movie follows the real life tale of Abraham Lincoln. No, I mean,
I think it was pretty much right down the line.
I don't know how accurately the movie follows whatever occurs or doesn't occur in the book, but the movie, I think, is worth watching, even though it didn't do well. I was very entertained with that movie.
I think the premise was too out there for people. Even though their premise almost got me to watch it, but I was bored with vampire stuff when it came out.
Yeah, I think the timing definitely hurt it.
Yeah, because I think it did kind of come out at the end of the vampire stuff anyway. And I think that premise was too far out there for most people.
Isn't there another one that's really similar?
There's a lot of vampire.
No, but I mean, wasn't there another property that came out at a similar time period? And I don't think I'm thinking of the Pride and Prejudice vampires. I think, or Pride and Prejudice.
That was zombies.
Zombies. I know. I said one thing, I meant the other.
Could I get my wife to watch it?
I still haven't watched it because the trailer really did nothing for me. I was like, this looks terrible. But I've heard that book is excellent. So who knows?
Okay. Now, the next interesting work, and we're not going to go into too much detail here because I think we have a whole episode talking a lot about this, Excalibur.
Another one, because it wouldn't be our first Excalibur episode.
Yes. No. But, I mean, definitely great, look at a supposed time of English history that wasn't written down. So that's one of the great things if you pick a time of history like that, right? And this story has changed a lot over time. If you go back to like our episode on that, which actually did really, really well.
I love that episode. That was fun to do. Episode. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that one.
There's a new one. I started watching a TV series. I think it's BBC, but I'm not positive. Called Britannia, and it is about the Roman invasion of not the first one, not the Julius Caesar one, but the Vespasian invasion of Britain. And it's very interesting. The druids there have very interesting magic, but it's all like really strong fantasy elements in there. It's like not even one of those that's like the next one where people might look at me with like an eyebrow up when I mention as calling it historical fantasy fiction. But Britannia really, it's like the way they did the druids was really cool, kind of creepy, but very excellent idea and a great story. Of that period of time. And I have a great spoiler I could throw out there for people who don't know history, but I won't do that.
I'm sorry. You're not.
I have a great historical
spoil history. Well, at least wait. Regarding what exactly? You don't have to spoil it, but what are you talking about?
The character. Obviously people know that the second time the Romans invaded, the Romans won, right? Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't know is the general who did that was the first was the first non-Julian emperor of Rome. Yes, and now the last one I've listed here, and I have some question marks next to it because I kind of go back and forth on whether it really was or not, and there were moments of it in there, I would say, but this is where I'm saying historical fiction and fantasy are kind of coming together anyway, and that is HBO's Rome.
I know you're a big fan of that one.
A great, definitely from historical fiction, a great series. And obviously it's the Julius Caesar story again, which is unfortunate because I know that one really well and I would like some other ones. But it was still, they did an excellent job delivering it. But there were some elements like where like they're showing actual curses that were used in the time. And it's questionable whether or not they worked, right? Because, like I cursed Julius Caesar to die and he dies. So,
well, I mean, is this a case where this is something that they wrote down after the fact and claimed it, or was it recorded prior to his death?
Well, I do think the HBO series of Rome was written after the fact.
Yes, I meant the bit about the curse, Jeff.
Well, no. The curse itself, I don't know if they know of the curse, but Brutus's mother and Julius Caesar it is believed from historical records at the time were familiar, and they had a falling out. So it's a logical thing, and it is an exact kind of curse that the Romans actually would do, and they did it like very historically accurate. The curse, which is one of the neat things about the series. But that's kind of pushing calling that one fantasy. But there were some moments like that where maybe there's something bigger happening. The two characters that follows, I can't remember, Polo and I can't remember both of the names right now, are very interesting because they are the only two non-patricians listed in Julius Caesar's memoirs, and they were listed twice. Yes. And they actually, some of the things that happened in the miniseries, he said that they did in his own work, in his own memoir. So, which is why it was probably based around them. Very interesting. I'd watch it no matter what. It's probably kind of loose calling it historical fantasy fiction, but there was at least one curse in there and some like ritual, like religion stuff from ancient Rome. So it's worth watching.
How long is it?
It's like 2 seasons. I don't know.
That's what I was about to say. You're like, there's one curse and there's one other thing, but it's 45 hours of television. You can sit
it's
down
worth
with
it,
that.
though.
Yeah, go for it. It's good stuff.
But like I said, the history has a lot of interesting things, and I think there's some like periods of time that would be useful for people to look at. The 4th century Roman Empire, and you can look at this from many different angles. But the thing that's interesting to me about the 4th century, that's when Christianity and the pagans were sort of vying over, and ultimately the Christians overtaking the Roman religion as the state religion of the Roman Empire, happened in the 3rd century. So there's some interesting things you could do with that story, pro or con either religion, but I think that's an interesting story of history. Vikings arriving in North America. I think that would be cool because we don't know crap about what really happened. We know that there were some settlements in Newfoundland that were definitely Viking and were here, long ago, long before Christopher Columbus ever arrived. Mm-hmm. But we also know that they were abandoned.
Well, let's be fair. Long before Christopher Columbus didn't arrive.
Well, he did arrive. Well, not to North America.
I was about to say, he didn't land in North America.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the Caribbean is technically, I think, if you like look at
now, but he's credited
not in that continental.
Yeah, he's credited with what he shouldn't be.
Well, yes, but who isn't?
Fair enough.
Like I'm credited with being bald, and I'm not. It's not fair.
With being what?
Bald.
Bald. Who credits you with being bald? I thought you said bold. I would definitely say you're credited with, which isn't true.
Another interesting, I think, period of time, which really, I think, if you go for some historical accuracy, would be more interesting. Well, not more interesting than that, but would be like around the time of Christopher Columbus, looking at some of the early expeditions into North America from the Europeans. The Indian civilizations were much more built up than we know. Or that we're taught in school. Massive cities, giant pyramids in North America, all over. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a group.
I knew there were some. Like I knew that there were some pyramids here in the States.
Oh, hundreds.
But I didn't realize they were that prolific.
Yeah. Advanced connected civilization, the Mississippians, which was starting to fade at the time because of the growth of the Iroquois, which was another really well developed matriarchal society, interesting, or kind of matriarchal, but some very interesting like historical things going on in North America, and we have like some of the Spanish, like and they're not necessarily the most reliable sources for first contact with native groups, and they have a tendency to cover a lot of stuff up too that they didn't want people knowing about. So not reliable, but there's some interesting events you could go over and talk about some really interesting cultures that people really have no idea about. And I really have learned only a lot very recently, thanks to great courses. Now, the Arab invasion of Persia, and it was after the rise of Islam, and they invaded the Zoroastrian Persian Empire of the time. And I think it's an interesting story because one, historically, this was the make or break battle for the Arabs, right? If they went in and screwed it up royally, the Arab growth would have stopped. And it was this very established older area. So I think it would be an interesting story. Axiom and the Ark of the Covenant. Oh, yeah.
I thought you were about going there. I was like, wait a minute. Are you about to talk about what I think you're going to talk about?
Yeah. No, I mean, they claim to have it down there. And I can't verify this, but I do believe there is some genetic linkage as well that's been proven at this point to people from Israel. So there's some strength to the story. It's interesting as heck, if nothing else. but how's the Axiom end up there, and what happens once it gets there, right? Besides it sitting in this building for centuries. And another interesting one, and it's to cover kind of all areas, the Europeans landing in New Zealand. And I'll leave you to look up that one if you're interested, but that's their first contact in New Zealand was fun. Now, who, creative-wise, who would this work for, And I think, obviously, if you love history, mythology, like someone like me, this might be a natural thing for me to do because I really like that kind of stuff. But, me, I go against all good common sense, so I reject it. But you might want to latch onto it. You'd be smarter than me if you did that, if you love history and mythology. Now, I think if you really need concrete examples to work off of, this is probably also a good idea too, right? If you struggle coming up with like new original things, don't try, stick to Earth. And if you really need a lot of detail before you can start using your world building, if you build off of Earth's historical, that's really going to give you a big leg up because most of the work's been done for you already, and you have to fill in a few details, which you can be very detailed about and have a huge, fabulous world built off of Earth. So I think that's a really good way to go there.
And I mean, like, look, let's just take a real quick example. Westeros is, Westeros isn't Westeros. We all know this. I mean, it's a great story.
And the War of the Roses.
Thank you. It is the War of the Roses. Like we've talked about this before. Game of Thrones is fantastic, and there's a lot of great fantasy fiction in there. But a lot of the themes, characters, conflicts are coming from history. So
and even some of the names, the Lannisters versus the Lancastrians. And you had the battle between the Lancastrians and those stubborn northern guys.
Yeah, the Yorks.
The Yorks.
Instead of the Starks.
That's right. But it's still great. And like I said, history tells you the good stories.
I think the big lesson here is that there is no downside to reading and getting familiar with history. There's no way you will come out of the other end less.
Yes. So exploring this avenue will make you a better. If you go alien or if you go Earth-like, you'll be better no matter what you do.
I think that going alien, honestly, it benefits you more because you can take something that is going to be harder to approach and make it more familiar, which lends itself to understanding.
Well, I think if you take a story that's familiar, it helps make up that your setting's so alien.
That is exactly my point.
Yep. Well, I want to make it so people can understand you.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that people don't follow my points?
Not that one.
Do you realize that it just comes down to, because you're the only one saying it, that you're the only one that doesn't get it?
I don't know what you mean.
Moving on.
Okay. So that is it for the core of this episode. Michael, what is the world building task of the day?
Okay. So Sorry, I'm having issues with the show notes. The world building task of the day is to think about a story from history that you would like to make. So we've listed a bunch in here, but obviously choose your favorite or just go to some history website and find a new favorite and make your own version.
Yeah. Go through a giant timeline of Earth history, look for something that catches your eye and go, okay, let's do this. Let's find out about this story here. That caught my eye. Let's find out more about that.
Pick a culture that interests you and just dig through their history.
Yeah, that's another way too. Okay, and now for the real world task. Some of you are like, I've been stuck in my world building, so I put my world aside. Maybe I'll take a look at this. And other ones of you are like, well, this might be more attainable because I've never world built before, and it might be a better place to start. My thing is, if you want to start world building, and you haven't done it, or you get stuck every time, you either get lost in the details, it just seems too hard, go to howtoworldbuild.com.
Seems obvious.
It seems obvious, right? And what it'll do there is you give your email, you sign up, and it will take you to a course that's designed to show you how simple world building it is. And really, I ended up the way I designed the course is, It will show you how to build a fantasy city. It's really a city building guide. But really the thing is, city building kind of covers all aspects of world building, into the sort of larger, grandiose things of cultures and states, to more granular things of the people. And cities are really believable because people interact with cities and towns. So if those are wrong, then people will think the story is off, that the world is off a little bit, because people, nations and government forms, you can screw up all the day. Very few people will ever even know or care. But cities are things that people they live in. So, you go there, I give you a little walk through, little pep talk. You go through, it takes like 30 minutes really. It shouldn't take you any more than 30 minutes to build a basic city for any setting, from the Stone Age to the Space Age. So go to howtoworldbuild.com, sign up. This isn't going to take up your whole life, but it will hopefully break that bridge to show that world building is simple and it's accessible to everyone, and everyone should do it.
I think you said it in a prior episode that I thought was
two, actually. Well, I've changed the URL every time.
I'm not. Let me finish my sentence.
Sorry.
I'm not talking about the link. I'm talking about the concept of anyone can world build. You said something like, you've been doing it since you were a kid.
Yeah, we all do it when we were a kid. Yeah.
Well, but that's my point. I think that that's such a great statement. I think that that's such a great way to look at it. Is like this is literally child's play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And so
which is not to say that I mean to be dismissive of the task, but I mean to be encouraging about the joy building it, and that you did it before. Maybe you've forgotten, but you've been here before.
And you go take this quick course, 30 minutes, and it'll start firing off those neurons again. Those old pathways will start to reopen. If you've overcomplicated the process, it'll help simplify it down for you a little bit to go, I've been thinking about all of this stuff that doesn't matter. Let me simplify what I'm doing. So it's completely free. I've simplified it down as much as I can because I really just want, more people to have the joy. Because you know what? For free, you can get endless hours of enjoyment from world building, even if you never do anything with it. So go to howtoworldbuild.com and check it out. And those other links, the gardoul.com/ready, that'll still work. Or the gardoul.com/start, that'll work. But now that the course is actually built and I bought a URL to point directly at it, it's probably just easier to go to howtobuildaworld.com.
And is this the one that is eventually...
I have to say it right.
Yeah, remember the link you bought.
I have to go find the URL. Crap.
No. And is this the one that is eventually not going to be free, but is free for all of our listeners?
I've decided I want to simplify it because I added too much into it. I was overcomplicating it myself. It's the risk of being a world builder. I simplified it down. This is not going to go onto Patreon. Okay. There's going to be a version of it that will, but it's going to have a little bit more to it. But I'll probably add it in for free into this one over time anyway. So,
well, alrighty then.
Alrighty. We will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardoul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the myth rules hot.